The bread comes out of the ground. Not from an oven. Not over a fire you can see. A man walks to the edge of a pale green lake, kneels in black sand, and begins to dig with his hands. The sand is warm, warmer than skin. He pulls up a steel pot that was buried there a full day ago, pries off the lid, and steam pours out into the cold air. Inside is a loaf of dark rye, dense and sweet, baked by nothing but the heat of the planet itself. He slices it while it is still too hot to hold. Butter melts into it on contact. He hands you a piece, and the first bite tastes faintly of the earth it came from. This is the least strange thing about this country. You have seen the photographs. You think you already know this place. Waterfalls in slow motion, green ribbons of light folding across a black sky. A pale blue lagoon with steam rising off the surface and people drifting in it like ghosts. That is the Iceland the cameras keep. It is real. It is also the thinnest possible layer of something far stranger and, against every expectation, far warmer. Because here is what the postcards never tell you. This is a country that should be hostile. It sits just below the Arctic Circle, alone in the middle of the North Atlantic, built on fire and torn by ice. The winters are long and dark. The ground shakes. Volcanoes open without warning. By every measure, it should be one of the harshest places a person could choose to live. And instead it is one of the warmest. Not in temperature. In texture. In the way life is lived here. Stay with me, and I will take you down through this place layer by layer, the way you only see it if you stop being a tourist and start paying attention. We will start on the surface everyone photographs. Then we will go underneath it. We will find a country that cooks in its own skin, that heats its streets with the breath of the earth, that still believes things most of the world stopped believing centuries ago. And at the very bottom, we will stand in a place where you can put one hand on one continent and one hand on another, and feel the planet slowly pulling itself apart beneath your feet. By the end, you will not want to visit Iceland, you will want to stay. Subscribe to Unseen Countries. The man who handed you that bread learned to bake it from his grandmother, and where she learned it is a story I want to tell you before we leave this lake. Stay with me for that. Let us begin where everyone begins. The arrival. You land in the dark. Even in summer it can feel that way, and the first thing you notice driving away from the airport is that there are no trees, none. The land runs flat and black to the horizon, a field of old lava furred over with gray-green moss so soft it looks like the whole country has been wrapped in felt. The road is empty. The light is low and silver and seems to come from everywhere at once, as if the sky itself is the lamp. You roll the window down and the air smells clean and mineral and faintly of sulfur, like a struck match held a room away. It does feel like another planet. That part of the legend is true. The road unspools across the lava with almost no one else on it. Steam drifts up from a vent in the distance and hangs there, pale against the hills, as if the ground is exhaling. You pass a single farm, a splash of red roof and a few horses standing nose to tail against the wind, and then nothing again for a long time. Just the moss and the open road and that strange even light that refuses to fully fade. You begin to understand the silence here is not empty. It is full. It is the silence of a place that does not need you, that was getting along perfectly well before you came and will continue long after. But then the road bends, and there is the capital, small and bright and low against the water, rooftops painted red and blue and yellow as if to argue with the gray, and you realize the second thing about this place. It is tiny. The whole country holds fewer people than a single mid-sized city elsewhere in the world. You could meet a real share of the entire nation in a week. There is an old joke here that you check a certain national database before a first date, just to make sure the two of you are not too closely related. It is told as a joke. It is not entirely a joke. This is the surface. The cinematic, empty, slightly lonely beauty that fills every travel film about this island. If you only ever saw this layer, you would call the place magnificent and a little cold, and you would leave. And then there is the light, which deserves its own moment, because it runs the rhythm of every life here. This far north, the year does not have a steady day and night, it has two opposite worlds. In the deep of summer, the sun barely sets at all. It dips toward the horizon near midnight, the whole sky turning the color of a peach, and then it simply rises again, and the night never comes. People lose track of time entirely. They garden at 2 in the morning. Children play outside at hours that feel illegal. The whole country seems to run on a kind of golden, sleepless energy, as if making up in a few bright weeks for everything the winter takes. Because the winter takes a great deal. In the darkest weeks, the sun rises late and gives up early, barely clearing the rooftops before sliding away again, so that the bright part of the day is a long blue dusk that never quite becomes morning. You might see real daylight for only a few hours. For a visitor it sounds bleak. And here is the surprise, the thing you only learn by talking to the people who live it. They do not dread the dark. Many of them love it. They have a whole craft built around it. The candles come out, the wool comes out, the thick hand-knitted sweaters with their circular yoked patterns, worn indoors and out. The coffee is endless and strong. The dark is not something to be survived. It is something to be furnished, softened, filled with light you make yourself. And in that long darkness, on a clear cold night, the sky sometimes does the thing everyone comes hoping to see. The green light. It does not arrive like a photograph. It arrives slowly, a faint pale smear at first that you might mistake for cloud, and then it sharpens and begins to move, curtains of green and sometimes red rippling and folding across the whole dome of the sky. Silent, enormous, older than anything human. People here have watched it their entire lives, and still they go quiet when it comes. That is the surface of this country, and its strange double clock. A place of endless summer light and long winter dark, that learn to be cozy inside the night rather than afraid of it. Do not leave. We are about to go warm. Step into the first swimming pool you can find. Not a tourist lagoon. A neighborhood pool, the kind in every town, the kind locals go to the way other people go to a cafe. You will pay almost nothing to get in. You shower, because the rules are strict and everyone follows them, and then you walk out into the cold air and lower yourself into water that is hot. Properly hot. The kind of heat that climbs up your spine and unknots something you did not know was knotted. Snow can be falling. It does not matter. You are warm to the collarbone, and steam is rising off the surface around you, and the man beside you is reading a newspaper that he has somehow kept dry. And two women are arguing cheerfully about politics in the corner, and a child is doing the same cannonball children do everywhere. This is the living room of the country. Not the home, the pool. This is where the day is discussed, where the gossip moves, where the old men hold court in the hottest tub and the teenagers pretend not to listen. There is an order to it that you learn quickly. The hottest tubs are their own little parliaments, ranked roughly by who has earned a seat through years of showing up. The water carries a faint mineral smell, a whisper of sulfur that fades the moment you stop noticing it. Nobody is performing. Nobody is hurrying. A businessman, a fisherman, a teacher, and a retiree can sit shoulder to shoulder in the same steaming water and you would not be able to tell which is which, and that leveling is part of the point. In a country this small, the pool is where the nation keeps in touch with itself. Strip away the titles, lower everyone into the same hot water, and talk. And the water is hot for free, more or less, because of what is underneath. Here is the thing the brochures gloss over. The heat in this country does not come from a furnace burning anything. It comes straight up out of the rock. The same fire that makes the volcanoes dangerous also makes the ground generous. Hot water rises to the surface here the way it does almost nowhere else on Earth, and the people learned, long ago, to simply take it. To pipe it into their homes. To fill their pools with it. To run it under their pavements. Yes. Under their pavements. Walk through the old center of the capital in the dead of winter, when the rest of the northern world is sliding around on ice and salt, and the sidewalks here are bare and dry and faintly warm through the soles of your shoes. Snow lands on them and melts. The city is heated from below, the streets thawed by water that was boiling underground an hour earlier. You are walking on the warmth of the planet, and nobody around you finds it remarkable, because to them it is simply Tuesday. That is the second layer. A country that looks like the surface of a frozen moon and lives, underneath, in a kind of permanent gentle heat. Fire that does not threaten. Fire that comforts. Hold that contradiction in your mind, because everything else here grows out of it. Now, back to the bread. Remember the man at the lake, the steel pot, the steam. The lake is called Laugarvatn, and what he made is called Veribrod, which means, plainly, hot spring bread. The recipe in his pot came down through his own family. He learned it from his grandmother, kneeling beside this same lake as a boy, and she had learned it from hers, the knowledge passed hand to hand down the generations like the warm pot itself. Each baker taught at the water's edge by the one before. That is the answer to the small promise I made you at the start. The man did not invent this. No one did. It is simply what people here have always done with the gift of a hot shoreline, going back further than anyone can quite name. He buries the dough in the morning in the hot black sand at the water's edge, where the ground holds a steady scalding heat just below the surface, and he digs it up the next day, slow-baked for around a full day by nothing but the earth. It comes out almost cake-like, dense and dark and just sweet enough, and they eat it hot with cold butter and with trout smoked from the very lake it was baked beside. Think about what that means. For most of this island's history there was little wood to burn and little to spare. So people did not fight the strange ground they had been given. They used it. They put their dinner into the earth and let the earth do the cooking. There are places here where you can still boil an egg in a stream simply by leaving it there, where the soil near a spring is too hot to kneel on with a bare knee, where the whole landscape hisses and steams and breathes like something alive that has not quite woken up. That is the first thing to text a friend tonight. Somewhere on this island, right now, somebody's dinner is buried in the ground, cooking in the heat of a sleeping volcano. And the food keeps this thread. There is a thick, soft white dairy here, eaten at breakfast and after dinner and any hour in between, made the way it has been made since the first settlers stepped off their ships more than 1,000 years ago. It is closer to a soft cheese than a yogurt, mild and cool, and a little tart, and the locals fold berries into it or simply eat it plain by the spoonful. Like the bread, it is old. Like the bread, it is a direct, edible line back to the people who first arrived here and had to invent a way to live. The food keeps surprising you. The lamb here, for instance, tastes of the wild herbs and grasses the sheep graze freely all summer, roaming the highlands unfenced, and it comes to the plate tasting faintly of the whole open country. There is langoustine pulled from the cold clean water, sweet and delicate. There are tomatoes and cucumbers grown in glass houses warmed and lit through the dark months by that same underground heat, so that a country with almost no farmable warmth grows fresh produce anyway, in glowing greenhouses, in defiance of the climate. And then, gloriously, there is the humble thing the whole nation actually loves. A small hot dog stand by the harbor in the capital has become something close to a national institution, the lamb and pork sausages served in a soft bun under crisp fried onions and a pale sweet brown sauce. Eaten standing up in the wind. Ask a local what you must eat here, and as often as not they will skip the fine dining entirely, and send you, grinning, to a hot dog. And then there is the food they dare you to try. In the old days, with little to spare and a long winter to outlast, people here learned to preserve almost anything, by smoking, by salting, by burying and fermenting. The most notorious result is a fermented shark, an old survival food turned local rite of passage, with a smell that arrives in the room a full second before the plate does and a taste that even many locals admit they tolerate rather than enjoy, usually chased immediately by a small glass of a fierce clear spirit. It is not really food anymore. It is a story you earn the right to tell. And that is the point. Even the harshest thing in the larder has been turned, over the centuries, into something to share around a table and laugh about afterward. If that herd of contradictions is starting to pull at you, the cold country that runs on heat, the harsh land that feeds you from the soil, then tap the like button now. It is genuinely the clearest signal I get that these are the places worth chasing, the ones where the obvious story turns out to be the wrong one. A like tells me to keep digging here, under the postcards, where it gets good. Before we go to the people, meet the animals that have lived beside them the whole way. The horses first. They are small, barely taller than a large pony, with thick manes and a calm, curious face. And they have been kept so isolated and so pure for so many centuries that once a horse leaves this island it is never allowed back, to keep the bloodline clean and free of disease. They are tough enough to live outside through the winter. And they do something almost no other horse in the world can do. Beyond the usual paces, they have an extra, smooth, gliding gait, a rapid run so even and steady that the rider barely bounces at all. There is a famous test of it where a person rides at speed holding a full glass, and does not spill a drop. To watch a herd of them move across a hillside, manes flying, is one of those sights that fixes itself in you and does not leave. And then the sheep, which outnumber the people, roaming free across the highlands all summer and gathered back down in the autumn in a great communal roundup that is half farm work and half festival. There is an old belief here in a particular kind of sheep, the leader sheep, cleverer than the rest, said to sense danger and bad weather and to guide the flock home through storm and dark. Whether or not you believe a sheep can do that, the fact that a whole farming tradition gave certain animals the rank of leader tells you something. This is a place that has always lived close to its animals, and credited them with more than most cultures would dare. Because now we go deeper, into the people themselves. And the people are where this place stops being merely beautiful and starts being unlike anywhere else on earth. Start with their names. There is a singer almost everyone in the world has heard of, from this island, known simply by her first name. Her full name is Björk Gudmundsdottir. That last part is not a family surname. It means, exactly, daughter of Gudmundur. Her father was named Gudmundur, so she is Gudmundur's daughter, and that is her name. Her own children would not be Gudmundsdottir, they would be named for her, or for their own father. This is how nearly everyone here is named. You take your father's first name, sometimes your mother's, and you add son or daughter to it. A man named John has a son, and that son becomes someone's son, Johnson. He has a daughter, and she becomes Johnsdottir. Families do not share a single carried surname the way most of the world does. A mother, a father, a son, and a daughter under one roof can have what look like four entirely different last names, and to a visitor it is bewildering, and to them it is simply the truth of who is whose. It reaches into ordinary life in ways you would not predict. Because the last name is not really a family name, the telephone directory here has traditionally been ordered by first name, not last. You look people up by who they are, not by which clan they descend from. A doctor is introduced and addressed by her first name. The Prime Minister is spoken of, easily and without disrespect, by a first name. There is a flatness to it, a refusal of hierarchy buried right in how everyone is called, and you feel at the moment you stop expecting people to behave otherwise. It goes further than that. There is an official committee whose job is to approve first names. If you want to give your child a name that is not already on the approved list, you must apply, and the name is checked to make sure it fits the grammar and the sound of the language, that it can be properly carried through the language's endings. This is not bureaucracy for its own sake. It is a country deliberately, carefully, protecting the thing it loves most. We will get to what that thing is in a moment. And there is this, which I love. Parents here are in no rush. A newborn can go for months without an official name at all. The law gives them around half a year to decide. In the meantime, the baby is just the baby, called by some small nickname, and sometimes that placeholder nickname simply sticks for the rest of the person's life, so that a grown adult is known to everyone by a name that has nothing to do with the one on any document. So the question I want to leave with you, before we go deeper, is this. If you could not pass your family name down the generations, if your name only ever meant whose child you are, would your family feel weaker to you, or somehow closer? Tell me below. I read them, and on this one I genuinely want to know which way you lean, because the people here will tell you it is the second, that a name like that keeps a parent in every introduction you ever make. Now, the thing they are protecting with that committee. The thing underneath the names. The language. When the first settlers came here, more than 1,000 years ago, they spoke the old tongue of the north, the language of the Vikings, and then something happened that happened almost nowhere else. On the mainland, that old language drifted and split and softened into the modern Scandinavian languages, each going its own way. But out here, alone in the Atlantic, cut off, the language barely moved. It stayed close to its root. It held. What that means today is almost hard to believe. The great old stories of this country, the sagas, were written down many centuries ago, tales of feuds and voyages and settlers and blood, some of the finest storytelling the medieval world ever produced. And a person here can pick up those texts, those centuries-old manuscripts, and read them, not as a scholar squinting at a dead language. As a reader. With some effort in places, yes, the way you might work a little to read something written in your own language a few hundred years back. But they can read them. The thread from the living person to the ancient page was never cut. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine being able to read the actual words your ancestors wrote 1,000 years ago, in the same language you used this morning to order coffee. Most of us have lost that entirely. Here, it never left. And they guard it actively, almost playfully. When a new thing comes into the world that needs a name, a computer, a helicopter, a virus, many languages simply borrow the foreign word. Here, more often, they build a new word out of their own old roots, so the language stays whole and self-made rather than slowly filling up with borrowed pieces. The word they coined for the computer, for example, was stitched together from their ancient words, for a prophetess and for number, a number prophetess, a teller of figures. There is a tenderness in that, in a tiny nation deciding that even the future will be named in the language of the sagas. And the sagas themselves are not dusty. They are gripping. Tales of stubborn farmers and outlaws and long blood feuds, of voyages west across the open ocean to lands no European had yet named, of clever women and doomed men, written in a spare, dry, almost modern voice that can still make you laugh out loud at a 1,000-year-old insult. They are the country's spine. People are named after their characters. Places are pointed out as the spot where this one fell or that one made his stand. The past here is not behind a glass case. It is underfoot, and it is still being quoted. And they love it. They love words here in a way that is hard to overstate. This is, by many measures, one of the most literary places on earth, a small nation that publishes and reads and writes far out of proportion to its size. There is even a tradition at Christmas, a wave of new books released in the final weeks of the year so that people can give them to one another on Christmas Eve, and then spend the night reading, often in bed. Often with chocolate, the whole country quietly turning pages together while the dark presses against the windows. They have a word for that flood of books. It is one of the loveliest customs I know of anywhere, an entire nation agreeing that the best way to spend the longest nights is inside a story. That is a country that protects its language with a committee, that can read its own 1,000-year-old books, that gives literature for Christmas and stays up reading it. The land outside may look like another planet, but the inner life of this place is old, and warm, and astonishingly intact. Which brings us to the strangest layer of all, the one I have been saving. Because in a country this modern, this educated, this connected, there is still a widespread, quiet, unembarrassed sense that the land is not empty. They are called the hidden people. In the folklore of this island, there are beings who live in the rocks and the hills and the lava fields, unseen, going about lives that run parallel to ours. Not ghosts. Not exactly the elves of a children's book either. Something older and more local. The hidden people. And the remarkable thing is not that such stories exist. Every culture has its stories. The remarkable thing is how present they still are. I will be careful here, because the surveys disagree and I do not want to hand you a number that is not solid. But it is fair to say that a real share of people here, when asked directly whether the hidden people exist, will not simply laugh and say no. Many say they are not sure. Some quietly say yes. And whatever any individual believes, the belief has left fingerprints on the actual map of the country. Roads have been moved. Construction projects have been altered, delayed, or rerouted to avoid disturbing a particular boulder or outcrop said to be a home of the hidden people. There are stones that builders simply worked around, that sit today in the middle of modern developments because no one was willing to be the one who moved them. A machine breaks down near such a rock and the work pauses, and people look at each other, and the road quietly bends. Think about what that takes. A modern European country, with engineers and budgets and deadlines, choosing on occasion to bend a highway around a rock because of who might live inside it. You do not have to believe a word of it to feel the pull of a place that leaves room for the possibility. That treats the land as something with its own residence, deserving of a little courtesy. And at the darkest time of year, the folklore comes fully to life. Forget the single gift bringer most of the world imagines at Christmas. Here there are 13 of them, brothers, who come down from the mountains one by one in the nights before Christmas. They are the sons of a fearsome old troll, and in the oldest stories they were genuinely frightening, mischief makers and worse. Over time they have softened into something closer to playful. Children leave a single shoe on the windowsill, and each night, if they have been good, one of the brothers leaves a small treat inside it. If they have been bad, they get a raw potato. A raw potato. I think about that a lot. An entire culture that decided the punishment for a misbehaving child should not be frightening, should just be slightly, comically disappointing. There is something about that, about 13 mountain brothers and a potato in a shoe, that tells you almost everything about the temperament of this place. Even its monsters are, in the end, gentle. And there is a tenderness in how the belief is held even by those who do not hold it. Ask someone here, an educated, modern person, whether the hidden people are real, and you will rarely get a flat denial. More often you get a pause, a small smile, a careful answer that leaves the door open. Not because they are sure. Because the cost of leaving the door open is so low, and the cost of slamming it, of declaring the land flatly empty and the old stories flatly false, somehow feels higher. It is easier, and kinder, and more interesting, to let the rock keep its secret. To bend the road. To leave the stone where it is. We have come a long way down now. From the postcard surface, through the warm water under the streets, through the bread in the ground and the names, and the 1,000-year-old language, and the people in the rocks. There is one layer left. The deepest one. The one the whole country is built on. To reach it, drive out from the capital into a wide rift valley, a place of cliffs and clear water and silver birch, a place where, more than 1,000 years ago, the early settlers gathered in the open air to make their laws together, one of the oldest such gatherings anywhere in the world. It is a quiet, grassy, beautiful place. People walk the paths and take their photographs and move on. But look at the cliffs. Look at how the land is split. Because what you are standing in is not a valley in the ordinary sense. It is a seam. A literal seam in the surface of the planet. This island sits directly on the line where two of the great plates of the Earth's crust meet. One side belongs to one continent, the other side belongs to another. And these two plates are not pressing together. They are pulling apart. Slowly, steadily, by roughly the width of your thumbnail each year, the land is being torn in two, and this rift valley is the tear, opening in real time, century after century. The country is, very literally, growing wider as you read this. You can walk down into the gap between them. You can stand in the no man's land where the crust has split, one wall of rock to your left riding one continent, one wall to your right riding another, and the cold air moving up through the crack from somewhere deep below. And in one place nearby, where the rift fills with glacial meltwater filtered for decades through the lava until it runs almost impossibly clear, you can lower yourself into the water and float in the crack itself. The water is achingly cold and so clear that it seems to vanish, so that you hang suspended in blue light with a continent drifting away on either side of you, and you understand, in your body and not just your head, that the ground is not solid and the planet is not finished. It is still being made. And you are floating in the wound where it is making itself. The cold presses in through the suit at your lips and your cheeks, the only bare skin, and the silence underwater is total. And below you the crack falls away into a deep blue dark where the two halves of the world lean apart. Reach out. One hand drifts toward rock that belongs to one continent. The other drifts toward rock that belongs to another. And between your open arms is the gap, the seam, the slow breath of a living planet, and for a moment you are the only thing holding the two sides together. This is the floor of everything. The fire that heats the pools, the fire that bakes the bread, the fire that fed the volcanoes, all of it rises through this tear. The strange generous warmth of the whole country comes from this single fact, that here the earth is thin and open and alive, and the people built a gentle life directly on top of it. And sometimes the floor opens. In recent years, after centuries of silence, a stretch of land near the capital began to stir, the ground swelled. Thousands of small tremors rolled through. And then it opened, and lava came up, a long bright fissure glowing against the dark, and it has happened again and again since, a slow rhythm of openings and pauses. It draws people from all over the world, not in fear but in wonder, standing at a safe distance to watch the planet pour out light. These are not the kind of eruptions that throw ash into the sky and ground the airplanes of a continent, the way one famous, unpronounceable volcano did some years ago. These are rivers of fire on the ground, low and bright and strangely calm. And from the right ridge at night you can watch the glow pulse on the underside of the clouds, and feel the heat of it on your face from across a valley. Stand there and the sound reaches you before you fully register it, a deep wet roar, the noise of molten rock fountaining and folding over itself, like surf, like a furnace, like the planet clearing its throat. The lava throws sparks. New black rock forms at the edges and ticks and crackles as it cools, glowing orange in its cracks like a dying fire that will not die. The air shimmers above it. And people stand and watch, wrapped in their wool, flasks of coffee passed hand to hand, the way you might gather to watch a storm roll in over the sea, not fleeing. Witnessing. There is no other show on earth quite like the simple sight of the world being freshly made in front of you, in the dark, in real time. I want to be careful and honest here, because this is a real and living landscape and things change. The situation shifts month to month, and the people whose town sits closest to the newest fissures have lived through real upheaval and real loss of the ordinary kind, of homes and routines and certainty. That is true, and it deserves respect. But the country as a whole goes on exactly as before. The capital is untouched. The flights still land. The pools are still full and hot. Most of this island does not so much endure the fire as live alongside it, the way you might live beside a large and mostly sleeping animal. With respect, with attention, and, somehow, with calm. That is the thing I keep coming back to. They are not afraid of it. They name the new craters. When the fire crept toward the threatened town and its harbor, they did not simply surrender the ground, they built walls. Great earthen barriers raised by machines working day and night, walls designed to catch and turn a river of molten rock, and in the main they held, steering the lava away from homes, and the road and the power that warms half the region. People gave the residents of that town a fond, half-joking nickname that blends the town's name with the old word for the seafaring warriors of the north, a salute to their refusal to be broken. They rally around them. They drive out to watch the lava the way other people drive out to watch the sunset. They have made a kind of peace with the fact that the ground beneath them is wide awake, and that peace is, I think, the real secret of the whole place. The warmth was never separate from the danger. It is the same fire. They simply chose to feel it as a gift. So that is the country, all the way down, a frozen surface over a beating heart. A people named for one another, reading their own ancient words, leaving room in the rock for the unseen, baking dinner in the soil of a living planet, and floating, unbothered, in the crack where the world splits open. And then, eventually, you have to leave. You drive back toward the airport across that same black lava field you crossed when you arrived, the moss glowing in the low silver light, and you notice that it does not look lonely to you anymore. You know now what is underneath it. You know the warmth that runs below the cold skin of this place. Maybe there is a thick wool sweater folded in your bag, bought on a whim, already smelling faintly of the place. And you find, to your surprise, that the thing you will miss is not any single waterfall or light show, it is the feeling. The particular feeling of being warm to the collarbone in cold air, of a country that found gentleness in the harshest hand the earth could deal it. The last thing I think about is the bread. The man at the lake, kneeling in the warm black sand, lifting the steaming pot out of the ground with his bare hands. Because that, in the end, is the whole country in a single gesture. A people who looked at a land that should have been impossible to live in, a land of fire and ice and long dark winters, and instead of fighting it, knelt down, reached into the warm earth, and pulled out something to eat. Something to share. Something still steaming from the heart of the planet itself. A place that should be hostile, and is, instead, the warmest country on earth. So here is the question I want to leave you holding, on the long flight home. We spend so much of our lives trying to control the ground we stand on, to make it safe, to make it solid, to make it ours. What would it change in you to live the way they do here, on ground that openly moves, that could open at any time, and to feel that not as a threat but as a kind of company? To be warmed, every single day, by the very thing that could undo you? I do not have an answer. I am not sure they would give you one either. They would probably just hand you a piece of warm bread and tell you to come back in winter, when the pools are best. If this place moves something in you, come find the others with me, subscribe, ring the bell, and I will see you on Unseen Countries.